I have a question this morning. Do you hope something in your life is going to work out? Or do you have faith that something in your life is going to work out? There's a big difference. There's a big difference between hope and faith. And let me see if I can tell a borrowed example of the difference between them. Becky likes this version of the difference between hope and faith. So I want you to imagine that you're sitting watching a high wire act. So there's a man up on the high wire, and he's on a bicycle, and he's pushing a wheelbarrow, and he's going across from one point on the high wire to the next. And you're sitting down beneath there, and you're getting a little nervous because there's not a safety net. And so you sit there and you hope that he makes it from one point to the other on the high wire. That's hope. You want to know what faith is? Mm-hmm. Faith is climbing into the wheelbarrow. Mm-hmm. That's the difference between hope and faith. It's a big difference. And so I want to talk a lot this morning about faith. Faith. So another question. How many of you have ever planted a seed and taken care of it and watered it and watched it grow into a full-blown plant? Most everybody, right? Maybe even to the point of bearing fruit, I don't know, but at least you've grown something. And I don't know if you had the experience that I had in elementary school, but I had this fun thing. We had to plant little beans in these small cups, and you had to write your name on the cup and put dirt in it, put the little bean in it. And then you lined them up on the windowsill of the second grade classroom, right? And we dutifully watered them, and we watched in amazement that these little green sprouts came out of the dirt. And within a few weeks or so, we actually had these little bright green bean plants all growing along the windowsill. And there were so many lessons involved in that simple little science experiment in the second grade. We learned that if Elizabeth missed a whole week of school and she didn't water her bean, that her bean was not going to grow as fast as everybody else's bean. Or if Steve somehow put his cup in a shadow in the windowsill and didn't get enough sunlight, his bean was not going to grow as well as everyone else's either. And we learned so much from that little basic experiment. And we come together in spiritual community to learn similar things. It's kind of a classroom of sorts. And actually, I think our entire lives are like big laboratories where we get to try things out and learn things. We get to do experiments and learn concepts that shape our circumstances and our situations. And we get to watch how our plants turn out, and we also get to kind of watch how other people's plants turn out as we watch people practice different things and concepts and choices and all of that. And so everyone in your life is kind of like a lab partner with you, learning things together. And together we become more empowered as we learn together. And that's what our theme. Our theme for the month of June is empowerment and protecting the vulnerable. So today we're going to focus on how we ourselves can become more empowered. So what we learned in elementary school with our little bean plants was that there were things that we could have faith and trust in. We could have faith that the bean, as a seed, contained everything in itself to become this plant, to become a full-grown beanstalk if we had the patience to take care of it. We could have faith that the sun would shine through the window with enough regularity that the bean would grow, and the plant would stretch toward that light. It did what it naturally did. We could also have faith that the water would supply the bean with the moisture it needed and the nourishment that it needed. And we could trust that the soil would support that little plant and provide whatever nutrients that the bean needed. We also had learned that we needed to have faith in ourselves, that we would do our part, that we would go to school and we would water our water. And if we did, then the combination of all of that, we could have faith that the outcome would be satisfying. And that's what my talk title today is about: faith sown, faith grown, and faith known. So let's start with that sown part. So in order to be empowered spiritual beings, making a difference in our world, as we move about in our communities and neighborhoods and life structures, we must understand how life works and what the individual's part is in it. In order for us to protect the vulnerable around us, we must first understand how we are protected in our own lives. We must understand what we can have faith in. If we're going to reap a crop of faith, we have to sow a crop of faith. If we're going to grow in our personal power and dominion over our lives, the only way we can manifest this personal empowerment is through planting and nurturing these seeds of faith. So we spend a lot of time talking about spiritual principles and spiritual laws, and we're trying to gain an understanding of God and how our thoughts and beliefs become our experiences. That's what we do around here. We study, we take classes, and by doing so, we are planting these seeds of truth and faith in our consciousness, seeds of faith. You know, many of you describe yourselves as seekers. I'm a seeker. Some of you have tried many spiritual paths and religions. You're seeking to understand your relationship with the nature of all life and the power that's greater than yourself. And I often say that the various religions are actually just different languages. They're all describing the same power, the same God, but they are speaking a different language. They're using their own culture, their own metaphors, their own analogies and words to describe and teach the very same ideas. These ideas are universal and eternal. They're truth, and each religion's practices and rituals and all of that describe things that someone or a group of someones did to access this power, this truth. So seekers in this sense are those who keep trying these different paths to find one that fits. But in order to become fully empowered, we have to go beyond seeking and actually become a practitioner. And I don't mean that everyone here has to take classes enough to become a practitioner that stands up here and offers prayer. But you must begin to practice. At some point, you've got to move beyond studying the truth, beyond, kind of memorizing the words, if you will, and begin practicing in the lab of your life. It's the only way that we actually can grow that crop of faith. So just like the school child that learned so much from bean planting, that experiment, we learn so much from sowing seeds of faith in our lives. Through practice, we cultivate the faith that thoughts become things, that the intangible becomes tangible. We stop thinking that luck is a thing. And we begin to understand that when we have a vision and when we align our choices to that vision, we no longer have to hope for an outcome. We can demand and expect our good to become manifest. As a child, we learned that we didn't have to hope that the bean would grow, that it would sprout. We didn't have to be the lucky kid in the class for our cup to have a plant in it. You didn't have to be popular. You could have faith. We learned that there were natural laws at play, and that those laws are impersonal, and they work for everyone who put that little bean in the cup and then did their part. When we sow seeds of faith, it's the same thing. We can trust that the law is at hand. The law is at hand. And we can practice using that law to build our faith. Through spiritual practice and use of the laws of truth, we shift from being a seeker to becoming a practitioner. Our good is not out there somewhere waiting for a capricious God to grant it. It's not how it works. Our good comes from planting a seed of faith and doing our part to bring it into our experience. We learn to have faith that all power, all joy, all love, all wisdom, all good is in us. And it is through our acceptance of that truth that these things become our experience that we live. The bottom line is we learn to have faith in ourselves. We learn to have faith in ourselves. We sow a crop of self-discipline to keep our minds fresh with God. We learn to be self-disciplined, to practice gratitude, accepting our good before it even shows up because we're grateful for what we already have. We learn to trust that whatever experience we're having is for us. And as we sow this crop of faith in our lives, we shift from a sense of lack and limitation, a sense of victimhood, to knowing that there's nothing to seek, There's nothing to seek. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to get. We got to act as the health, as the wholeness, as the prosperity, as the fulfillment that we are. Faith comes through that practice, but it starts with sowing seeds of spiritual truth in the soil of our minds. That's how it starts. So now that we've planted these seeds of faith, how do we grow it? What is this faith grown part? So we grow our faith by virtually just living. Just living. We grow our faith through going through different kinds of experiences where we get to test the solidity of things. So test the solidity of the things that we affirm and the truth that we hold. What we quote and affirm, we begin to see if we really know it. Life is always bringing us opportunities to test our theories and look at old habitual beliefs in comparison to the new thoughts that we're growing in our little science cups. Here comes a life challenge or an impending change or a diagnosis or a family pattern or whatever. And the question is, am I going to respond in the same old way I always have? The same way I've been responding my whole life? Or am I going to remember that I'm a child of the universe and grow the truth into a full experience in this moment? Am I going to wither and withdraw into safety of old habits? Or am I going to take a stand and remember that life is happening for me? Am I going to make an old familiar choice? Or am I going to flex my muscle of truth and try something different? Something more aligned with my identity as a powerful being in the world? Shall I move towards love or should I retreat towards fear? Every choice we make, every habit we break, every new thought we think that lifts us up is how we grow our faith. Those are the things that water that little bean sprout and push it toward the sunlight. You know, I talked last week about universal life patterns and the cycle of building life structures, existing in those structures, and then watching them transition out of our experience to make room for things that are new. It happens to all of us. You know, when you're going through those cycles, we find it easy to grow our faith when we're in the first two pieces of the cycle, right? You know, it's easy for me to know that life is for me when I land a new job, right? Or when I get into a relationship, or when I move into the neighborhood and everyone's so friendly and welcoming, right? It's easy for me to know that God is with me, living as me, when that job moves towards a promotion or I experience a milestone with my loved one, or when I plan this neighborhood barbecue and everybody shows up and everybody brings a great dish and it's all fun and I'm thriving and coasting in my structures. I know God's for me then. But when we go into that other natural part of the cycle, that's when my faith muscle gets built, where I get some strength and it grows out of using it. When the company gets sold and I get downsized, or when my relationship feels challenged or limiting, or friendships on the rocks, or when the new neighbor moves next door and thinks my dog is irritating, and then all the other neighbors agree that it's been a nuisance the whole time. So when the structures begin to feel less than comfortable and change is required, my spiritual truth gets tested, and I get to choose how to view it. I get to grow my faith. And I grow it by looking around me for some additional spiritual truth. Like, what can I do to shore my faith up? Emerson taught us that nature is our greatest teacher. He wrote this: nothing divine dies. All good is eternally reproductive. The beauty of nature reforms itself in the mind, and not for barren contemplation, but for new creation. I grow my faith when I see a sentence like that and say, this wisdom is for me. This wisdom's for me. Let me look at nature and see if I can support that wisdom with an example on display in the creation of the all, the creation of God all around me. Because nature is a really good way to grow your faith. So I'm sure you've had the experience of plucking a dandelion from the ground. not the cute little yellow one, no, not that one. You know, the puffy one. The puffy dandelion that's already gone to seed, right? You know, it seems somehow so satisfying to just blow it to bits, right? And you purposely blow on it and watch it disperse in its magical little airborne dance, right? The florets that make up the head of the dandelion, they don't resist our blowing. They don't dread the wind of nature. The collapse of its form launches a mass of seeds to find new territory to reproduce and grow again. Our wind-blown dandelion becomes many dandelions. Emerson was right. Nothing divine dies. All good is eternally reproductive. Breathe that in for a second. Nothing divine dies. Everything good in your life is eternally reproductive. Beauty reforms itself always in new creation. Faith, you can have faith in that. In observing the nature of all of life, we grow faith in ourselves, in our own stuff. We grow faith in the God within and our capability to weather whatever it is that seems to blow apart. Whatever it is that we're trying to hold together. We learn to lean into what we know from our studies and from our life experiences, but we are also called forth into the recognition that what we don't know is significant for us too. At any point in our lives, we know an awful lot, but at that same moment, there's so much we can't yet know. We can't. Faith is allowing ourselves to be comfortable in the unknown, in what we don't know. This week in the newsletter, I spoke about courage, and I quoted this philosopher and spiritual teacher, Osho, and he says this: courage is a love affair with the unknown. If you're going to grow your faith, if you're going to grow to be fully empowered, you must be willing to have a love affair with the unknown, to accept that change is going to happen, and that you're never alone, and you never have a lack of anything that you need, ever. If you can do that, you will continue growing your faith. So what about this third part, this faith-known part? Empowerment hinges on our honesty with ourselves and our honesty with others. See, once we've studied spiritual truth and we've sown the seeds of faith, once we've been living from a spiritual perspective for a while and we've applied the principles in numerous life experiences and grown our faith, we can begin to look within ourselves and know ourselves. In that knowing, we're empowered and we're no longer diminished by our own imperfections. Empowerment hinges on our honesty. When we can begin to realize that our personality and our ego and our body, our magic suit, and our emotions and our life experiences, they come together to form a holy channel through which spirit expresses, and we can honestly assess ourselves in our interactions with others, we can know ourselves and know God in a completely different way. When we can be in the presence of our own stuff and still experience the holy and the sacred, we're at a different level of knowing. But we must look at ourselves with deep honesty. If we want to evolve to the point where we can meet the new and demanding rhythms of a global culture, we must figure out how we can love ourselves and empower ourselves and to serve in a bigger way. If we want to protect the vulnerable around us, we must address our own vulnerabilities and learn to live with them. I must become deeply curious as to why do I repeat the patterns that I repeat? I must seek to understand why I make the habitual choices that I make, and why am I triggered by feelings I don't want to have or conversations that make me feel uncomfortable. I must look at why I harbor this grudge or I hold this idea stubbornly in place. Even when I have lots of evidence to the contrary, I still hold on to it. So this deep level of self-curiosity is a healing energy because it lifts me out of silent self-condemnation, and it calls me toward a greater inner understanding and insight. Faith in myself can grow as I look at my own stuff with gentle inquisitiveness instead of shame. The roots into my spiritual identity grow deeper and deeper as I know myself better. When faith is known, I no longer fear anything outside myself. I know who I am. I am that which is all-powerful and all-loving. Nothing touches my true self when I identify with my true self. When faith is known, I remember that life is unfolding for my highest good and that whatever detail and circumstance that is seeming to disempower me in this moment is powerless to do so unless I allow it. And so I always look for real life circumstances that illustrate what I'm speaking about on Sunday mornings. And I didn't have to look very far this week. Perhaps you've been hearing about Amanda Eller. Amanda Eller is the 35-year-old Maui hiker that who survived in the jungle for 17 days before her miraculous rescue last week. If you're not familiar with the story, Amanda's family reported her missing when she didn't answer her phone after going on a hike on May the 8th. And her SUV was found in the reserve parking lot, and her cell phone and her wallet were inside the car. And so the search began by helicopter and on foot in this wild terrain. If you've been to Maui, you know it's just basically a jungle, dense jungle actually. And after Amanda was rescued, I watched her interview and I read some of the things that she said about it, and I found it fascinating. She said that she left her cell phone in her car because she trusted herself to go on a little jog without it. And throughout the 17 days, she realized that she had kind of miscalculated that pretty greatly. But she said that a key part of her survival was maintaining her mental strength. And she held the wisdom that being lost was a part of her path and her bigger life journey. And she must accept and embrace the fact that she was lost. So she had that awareness. I'm lost, it's for me, this is happening for me, and I have to accept that I'm lost. And it took her almost a full week to get to that place of acceptance, she said. A whole week. And she maintains that acceptance of this circumstance is what kept her alive. She just accepted it. She didn't fight it anymore. This is what's happening. And she said that she often sat beneath the trees and she meditated, allowing her intuition to guide her. She said that she started losing hope because she kept seeing these helicopters fly over, like 20 helicopters, but they couldn't see her in the jungle. So when she let go of her hope, she turned to her faith within herself, her faith in life itself and her inner wisdom. And she was guided to plants to eat. She was guided to waterfalls from which to drink. She found mud to sleep in to keep her warm. She found boars' dens to sleep in. She found everything that she needed was around her when she could look at it and accept that she was there. She said she never felt alone and that her intuition sustained her throughout this whole harrowing ordeal. And even though she had many physical injuries and she could only basically crawl at the end of her 17-day ordeal, she said she slid between two waterfalls and felt like she could just go no further. And one of her friends said that she had resigned, that she was going to die between those waterfalls. I didn't hear Amanda say that, but one of the friends who was interviewed said that. So she had accepted her mortality, but she had faith that this entire experience was somehow important in her life path. And one day later, a helicopter pilot that had been hired by the family, the state had already given up looking for her. They had suspended their search. But the family was determined, and they hired a pilot to go out. And that pilot had been intuitively saying to other people, we need to fly over this particular part. And they're like, oh, that's way too far away. She won't be there. But he said, I'm going. And he went, and they spotted her, and she was rescued from this deep ravine. And she said, I'm so grateful to be alive, grateful for every breath, grateful for everything. Grateful for everything. Life may not hand us the experience of being physically lost in a jungle, but it is going to hand you things, many things, that will require you to have faith. If we wish to live an empowered life, each of us must commit to a life of discovering spiritual truth, to a life of practicing our faith in every circumstance we face, and taking a deep into curiosity about ourselves. Know thyself. Each of those steps sow our faith. They grow our faith so that we may live in the knowing of our faith. You are an empowered and brilliant being. Have faith in that truth today and every day. And so it is.